People who have gone out for a pack of cigarettes and never went back to your family. What happened after you left? Serious. I grew up in a very abusive, strict home. My stepfather beat both my sisters, and then when they left I was next. Anyways, one night he made me walk home from the mall because he wouldn't give me a ride. I called and asked around 5 and he said you better have your ass home at 5. I walked the 8 miles and was pretty wiped out when I was coming up the driveway. We had a big front window and I saw him sitting in his chair drinking whiskey waiting for me. When I walked in he said something and I replied, "You won't do, Speed." The next thing I knew he had me pinned to the wall and punched me in the face until I was knocked out. When I woke up I remember feeling the blood from my nose, and my mother was standing there and told me I was a disgrace to go clean my face off. I went upstairs and grabbed a hat and walked out and never went back. I was 14 years old at the time. Undefined. Good for you. At such a young age, that was an incredibly responsible and mature decision. You are strong. When I was 5, my dad came home from work. And my mom and she wanted an immediate divorce. I found out many years later she'd had an affair and was pregnant. He moved out of the house. They had 3 little kids together. I was the oldest. And she married her second husband twice. They weren't divorced the first time. He was paying child support as he was supposed to. But she was calling him at work and sending him letters at home. His sister kept them, asking for more. And he began to get complaints about it from his bosses. He asked his mother what he should do. She advised him to tell her he was giving her all he could, and all he was ordered to, and that he was going to lose his job if she kept it up, and that if she didn't stop, he'd leave the state, and she'd never hear from him again. She thought that would make her wise up and leave him alone. So he did. But she continued. So he asked his mother for advice again. Her advice was to follow through. And so he did. He packed his clothes into his car and headed for Canada. He got as far as 2 states north from where he began. Liked a little town he came across, and got a job there. I never forgot him. I was the only one of the 3 of us kids that had any memories of him. But when I was 16 and moved away from my extremely abusive home in every way, I called my aunt, whose name I knew, who happened to live in the town I was also then living in, and told her I wanted to meet him. Coincidentally, he happened to be visiting her. I met him, my aunt, my grandfather, and my grandmother while he was there. It turned out to be the only time I would ever meet my grandfather. He died 2 years later. But I will never, ever forget it. He wrapped me up in a big, strong bear hug, told me how beautiful I was, how much he loved me, and how much he'd always loved me, and how very, very happy he was to see me again after all these years. I cried then. And I'm crying again now, writing it down. I can still feel the love and caring in his arms. I wasn't ready to get to know my dad at 16 though. I realize now that I just wanted to see him. It took me another 10 years before I contacted him again. But I did. When I was living in California. And when I did, he took 2 weeks vacation, so did I. Drove down to see me. And we spent the entire 2 weeks getting to know one another. And once he left, we were in contact daily. And I quit my job and moved up to the PNW a month later. Because I knew the hole in my heart would never be filled until my dad was a part of my life. And I was correct. My son has a grandpa because of my decision. And my dad is the greatest grandpa there is. I wish he'd have always been in my life. But the outcome I received is worth everything I've been through. I love you, Dad. 3. I was a toddler. 2 or so. After September 11th my mother moved up to Vermont with her boyfriend who, for what it is worth, is now in federal prison for first-degree murder of another girlfriend. As that indicates he wasn't a good guy. He wouldn't let me drink water unless I'd eaten a full meal. And I was too. So my mother had to serve fruit with every meal so I'd have moisture and let me drink water while he was at work. On days he didn't work she and I would go out and explore as much as we could. We took to cleaning up old overgrown graveyards. Since it was interesting and fun and most importantly time-consuming. But he was very controlling and didn't want us to leave. She didn't have a car, so we had to walk everywhere. Being from NC and with no ability to purchase a train ticket because he controlled all her finances and she didn't have a phone. She was forced to use a payphone to contact my grandparents to fly up and come rescue us and fly us back. And had to tune it with his work schedule to make sure he wasn't there when they came because she thought he might try to hurt me if he saw them come to take us. Didn't leave my wife and kids as I don't have any, but I did walk out on my mother and siblings without any notice. Dad was not in the picture. After. Best decision of my life. My mother refuses treatment for her very serious mental illness or illnesses and was incredibly abusive physically as well and neglectful while I was growing up. I saw the affect it had burn out older siblings with no motive or drive and instead embraced the crazy just to feel sane in the toxic family home we lived in. I was homeless for about a year and a half, living out of a duffel and bumming food from friends. I feel like my life hasn't even started until I left it behind. I feel like it held me back for 17 years and I now am finally being able to find out who I am. Mom never came looking for me. I reconnected with my estranged father. Home I learned was in the military from the moment he was 18 until he was HD at 43. He has severe PTSD from his 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now getting his master's in outdoors leadership, which I believe is a perfect way to use his massive skill set. I don't see him much if ever, but at least I know some blood is still thicker than water. Outdoors leadership. Can anyone tell me WTF that is, please? I didn't go out for cigarettes. But I pulled a similar stunt. My mom is abusive and I had no spine. So I told her I was going to move in with my dad for the summer. I said I would be back before the end of August. After I moved in with my dad, I got my state ID. My mom didn't want me to have any kind of ID and I finally got my driver's permit a few weeks later. I felt bad for lying at the time. But now I'll know if I didn't lie to her I would have never gotten out of there. I would be stuck living on a speedy little hobby farm with a woman who did everything in her power to tear me down and hurt me. I was 10 years old when my mom and dad split up. We had been expecting it. But I didn't know that my mom had packed up suitcases for herself, my sister, and I. One day we went to school like everything was normal. And went to my mom's parents after school. It wasn't unusual for us to have dinner there. But then mom sat us down and told us we'd be staying there for a while. Ended up being 6 years before we got our own place. I never got to go back to my bedroom again. My dad got remarried and his wife's daughter moved in and repainted my room. When I had to visit them I slept on the couch while she slept in my room. Undefined. When I was 16. I moved out without telling my stepdad. But my mom was in on it. And I just moved in with my grandparents. I left on a Friday. Got all my stuff in just 2 trips. I was told he didn't even notice I was gone the first weekend. He was pretty mad once he figured it out. But it was all mostly a non-event. Everything turned out okay for me. It will have been 21 years. This September. My real dad ghosted like 4 families. His first family. He had a son. He was in that family for 13 years. His son had a motorcycle wreck and ended up in intensive care. A year later he ghosted that family and moved to a new state. Just up and left. Didn't take anything but his clothes and his car. Second family. He had a daughter. He left almost immediately. Then he moved to another state. And married another woman. And had 2 more kids whom I've never met or spoken to. Don't even know their names tbh. Jake. John. Jordan. Josh. Something with AJ. He went out for a pack of smokes and never went back, his own words. Then he met my mom. And had my sister first. He ghosted my mom 2 years later. Then showed up for some quick whoopee. And I happened. He ghosted her. But didn't leave the state. She called the cops and my first memory is of the cops bringing my dad to the house in cuffs and letting him go. Only for him to attack my mom while she was holding me and she dropped me. Then the cops arrested him. He wanted out. He got out. He had 2 more marriages. But no kids. It's his MO to shack up with well-off women and mooch until they either kick him out or he gets bored. It's really flipping painful to see. Because I want to be a swiping dad who's there for his kids every flipping second of their lives. I want to be the exact opposite of him. When I was 18, I moved out from my abusive father. I was commuting to college at the time and I had morning classes, so the night before I packed my car with as much of my stuff as I could and set off. One of my professors that I regularly talked to after class noticed that my car was full of clothes and asked if everything was okay. Over lunch I explained my situation, and he offered to take me in. I had already made arrangements to live with my mother. After my classes for the day were over, I went home for the first time since I was a child to live with my mother. I slept on the couch for months before getting my own bed. And we didn't always have the money to eat. But we made it work. I have seen my father one time since then because he swore to me that he had changed. That night he proceeded to get wasted and tried to put his hands on me. I haven't seen him since. And I have no regrets. Undefined. Edit 2. Just to clear up some confusion that I've noticed in the replies. I am a male. Put hands on me is a slang term for starting a fight. I'm not sure if it's popular slang or regional slang Southeast US, but at no point was I sexually abused. I apologize if there was any confusion. My ex-husband was extremely physically and emotionally abusive, as well as an alcoholic/addict. He obsessively controlled the money and every second of my daily routine. An unplanned 5-minute delay to get gas on the way home would result in a dressing down if I was lucky. A beating if I wasn't. We had 3 daughters. And on the few occasions I threatened to leave, he'd tell me to go ahead and leave. But I couldn't take our daughters with me. At one of our couple friends' wedding reception, he got drunk as per usual and lost his mind over something insignificant. Dragged me around in the street by my hair, and pulled a gun on me in front of the wedding party. One of his friends, who was a real POS, took me aside while the groom's mom was driving my ex home, and told me, "You don't have to live like this." It was like a light went on in my mind. This guy says I don't have to live like this? It took me a couple of weeks to put a plan in place. But one morning after my ex left for work, my dad helped me pack everything that would fit in a U-Haul. And GTFO. I'd like to say I never saw him again after that day. But I was pretty lucky he decided to leave me alone after an initial period of stalking and about in jail for violating an order of protection. Fast forward 15 years. And I finished undergrad, law school, and postdoc. I'm remarried with 2 more amazing kids. And life is pretty much goals. Undefined. Edit 2. Thanks for the gold. And for the positive comments. All this isn't something I talk about much in my D2D. It's been years. But a lot of it is still fresh. And it's occasionally cathartic to open up to strangers. My story is a little different and I apologize. But I grew up in the aftermath of something like this. Before my parents got together, my dad was married and they had a daughter. His wife had an affair with his therapist, who then told her all my dad's traumas and triggers so she could use them against him. When she had him at just the right point of breakdown, she took my sister and disappeared. Just poof. Gone. No trace. My dad looked for her. Hired investigators. Tried everything. 8 years later, my mom and dad married. And I was born a year after that. I remember from childhood that there were 2 pictures of a little girl who looked like me. And I was told it was my sister. But it didn't mean anything to me because I didn't understand. My parents chose to stay in the same town and at the same address no matter what. So that if my sister ever came looking, he'd be easily found. He kept a gift-wrapped Kermit the Frog on the top shelf of his closet that had been a present for her 3rd birthday that he never got to give her. One morning when I was 8, he got a phone call. He said hello. Paused. Identified himself by his full name. Then went pale. I remember him saying, "If this is a joke, it isn't funny." It wasn't a joke, though. It was my sister. She was about to graduate high school and had recently learned that her horrible stepfather, the goddamn therapist, was not her biological father, and so had wanted to meet her real family. We've been very close ever since. She knows now that Dad never stopped looking for her, and everything she was told was a lie. Dad was finally able to give her the Kermit stuffed animal, and she has it displayed in her house. It's had a huge impact on all of us. For a long time my dad was terrified that my sister was going to disappear again, or hate him, and to an extent still worries about it. My sister had been psychologically and sexually abused by the therapist's stepfather and had a hard time trusting for a while. I did pretty well until my ex-husband and I split up. He knew the story, so one of his tactics was to take our son on 2 separate occasions and disappear with him. The first time he was only gone for 2 weeks. The second time was a month. That was hell. But it's over. I was 14 and literally went out for a pack of smokes. I was visiting my estranged dad and his newest family in another state. I was meant to live there as my mom pawned me that way since she was a pill-popping alcoholic at the time. I didn't know that, and he hadn't been in my life for years. When I got there, I was really excited to visit and hang out. But he immediately tried to dictate me without any remorse for being gone or getting to know me again. I wasn't having any of that. So he slapped me across the face. They passed out and I headed out for smokes I had quit prior to, but decided to start up again 3 miles later and hit Bill. I got my smokes. I ended up hitchhiking back and they were just waking from a nap. I told him I didn't want to stay, so he later dropped me off at the nearest Greyhound without any words. Fast forward to 20 years later. He had a massive stroke and was just diagnosed with dementia, so he couldn't talk much. He could say yeah and a few things. I hadn't spoken to him this entire time. So I drove and flew for 36 hours to spend 12 hours with him. I was sitting next to his bedside and it was quiet. That's when I told him I forgive him. I knew it was the last time I'd see him. He wanted to say something, but couldn't. He cried and said yeah. I just replied, I know. I'm your favorite child. We laughed super hard. He died a year later, in 2015. Sometimes closure isn't for them. It's for you. I hadn't started a family of my own yet, but I was engaged to my ex, who I just ended up ghosting after a few years. It was several years ago and he had to move back to Tokyo for his job. We met in the US while he was an expat, so he asked me to come live with him. Moved. Met the family. All that stuff. Then, one day I came down with the flu and was miserable and was so weak I couldn't even walk myself to the toilet. He was trying to come onto me several times that day and I kept refusing because of obvious reasons. Then I was in the middle of sleeping and he started to take off my clothes and have sex with me while I was sleeping after already refusing it to him. I woke up and was like WTF and made him stop. Then I pretended to be asleep till he left for work the next morning. Packed my speep and left. Dropped the key off at concierge and hurried out of that building in a huge panic. Never spoke to him again. Cut off all contact immediately. I booked hotels for a couple of weeks and met my now husband. Undefined. I moved out when I was 15. I was living with my mom, sister, and older brother. It was my older brother's house. His house was unlivable. The water was orange. There were fleas and ticks everywhere. And because of his 11 cats that kept reproducing because they were never spayed/neutered, there were piles of cat poop against the walls. On top of that, my mom was a textbook narcissist. Always going out and partying. Passing out drunk. Smoking pot and snorting coke. The works. She went to Myrtle Beach for a week. I mentioned it to my best friend, who invited me to stay at her place until my mom came back. Halfway through the week, her mom invited me to live with them. I said yes and stayed there until I left for the Navy 2.5 years later. I still talk to my parents sometimes, but it's an estranged relationship at best. I'm almost 23 and happily married, which I didn't even tell my family about until a year after. So I suppose it all worked out in the end. I did this. My parents are A-grade assholes, and at the age of 16 I overheard my mother telling my sister I was being kicked out soon. So I took matters into my own hands. Packed my speep and left at 2 a.m. They didn't notice for a couple of days. I put an ad in the local paper for free stuff, which was every bit of furniture I left there. They rang my other sister who I moved in with and were so mad. Not that I had left. More that I had given all their stuff away. Fast forward 20 years and I still don't have a relationship with my parents. They call me once or twice a year to ask for money, which the answer is always a firm beep no. I heard around town that they were upset I just vanished in the middle of the night. They had to keep up their public image. This may not fit the post criteria, but I'll tell my short story. When I was 16, my relationship with my mother hit rock bottom. We had never gotten along really at all. And my pending possession of marijuana charge definitely didn't help it. A legal southern state. Christian family. At this time we were living with a different family. Due to some financial problems we were having. Who also saw me and what I do as pure sin. One night I overheard the upstairs family talking to my parents. Yes, that's what we called them. We lived in their basement FFS and they were giving my parents hell about me. Calling me a drug dealer. Saying how unwelcome I am in their home. And at one point I even heard the wife call me a crackhead. I decided that this was going to be the first time I ever actually acted on my own whim. I packed up my things while I pretended to be asleep. And I left the next day when everyone went to work. I moved in with my grandparents and I've never gone back. My mother and I still talk. My stepfather wants nothing to do with me. And I don't intend on speaking to the upstairs family again.